Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Reisner. I'm the co-chair, along with Tina Steinberg, for Herd and Ride. And I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. As many of you know, Herd and Ride is a committee comprised of representatives from both independent and area public schools who arrange for speakers to educate the community on various aspects of parenting. What you may not know is that tonight's talk launches our 20th anniversary. Herd and Rye was found in 2000 to provide learning opportunities and support for parents. The first flyer stated that the events were for attendees from all communities united in the efforts to learn how to positively influence the next generation. The events were designed to share the ups and downs of raising children with camaraderie and humor. We're so pleased to be continuing that tradition this evening with our first speaker of the year, Dr. Molly Ness. And Dr. Ness will talk for approximately 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll give you the chance to get your questions addressed for the remainder of the time. You can type in your questions at any point during the talk using the QA option at the bottom middle of the screen. And now I'd like to turn things over to Tina Steinberg, again, my co-chair, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Jen. We are very excited to welcome Dr. Molly Ness, a literacy researcher, teacher educator, and university professor who holds over 15 years of teaching and clinical reading experience. Dr. Ness specializes in language, literacy, and learning services for students, families, and school districts. She has impressively written 4 books and numerous articles in top-tiered educational journals. She joins us today to help parents navigate the new normal that sits before us as we begin this school year. As a parent of 3 children, our home has become a war zone of Google Classrooms, glitchy Zooms, and endless calls for I need help. Dr. Ness brings us a ray of hope and shares a focus on supporting our children's socio-emotional health and educational well-being. We thank you for joining us this evening, and as a reminder, type your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much to Herd and Rye for hosting this. And thank you especially to those of you who are joining us from outside of Rye. I know there are many parents out there. I know there's some teachers out there. So some of my conversation will also be relevant to those of you who are in the classroom. Obviously, teachers, you know that you are near and dear to my heart. So when Herd and Rye approached me about this topic several months ago, they asked me, is this in your wheelhouse? And I initially hesitated because my area of research is usually dyslexia and reading comprehension and instructional practices with regard to literacy. And I sort of felt like a little bit of a phony saying I had anything to offer in terms of expertise about virtual and hybrid learning. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we are all sort of learning and living through experience. And so what I'm hoping to offer today is thoughts, ideas, tips, takeaways from my professional organizations, from education think tanks, from my social network of teachers and my students who are living this, as well as my personal experience. I have a 5th grade daughter who is 100% virtual, so I can absolutely relate to the fact that your home is a war zone. The fact that you have 3 of them is, kudos to you, because I am barely keeping my head above water with just the one. But I also, just before we really dig into content, I wanted to just direct you to how to get a hold of me for follow-up conversations, for questions. As I speak tonight, I will make reference to lots of different articles and references and data and resources. So please, if you are interested in finding those, please feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to follow-up conversations. As we get started, when I think about the presentations that I do, most of the time I base my presentations on the gold standard in reading research, which is peer-reviewed research. And right now we are living through a time where we don't have any hard data. We have no peer-reviewed research about what effective virtual and hybrid instruction looks like. And in that sense, we are all sort of improvising and making this up as we go along. And I don't just mean us as parents, I mean our policymakers and our teachers and our school leaders and all of us. And that helps me when I think through my own struggles, because these are obviously unprecedented times, and it gives me a little bit of kindness to myself, realizing that when I got the parenting guide, it did not have a chapter for how to parent in a pandemic. If you're a teacher, certainly none of the work that you did in your teacher education had a course or chapters or readings about teaching in a pandemic. So we are all improvising as we go along. If you're like me, you have spent the last couple months doom scrolling and thinking through decisions about what to do for your child or children. What you decided for one child in your home may not be the same situation as what you decide for another child at home. And certainly I know that I have felt like there's no right answer in this. And so what I want to talk tonight about is some takeaway strategies, as well as mindset approaches that we as parents, as facilitators of hybrid and virtual learning can really think through and can adopt. The first mindset I want to focus on is sort of pushing away our worst fear. I know that I have certainly experienced some of this fear of, well, what's going to happen? My child might be behind. And when we think about being behind, what does that really mean? There isn't a normal anymore. There isn't the average anymore. So when I think about being behind, I think about it as this social construct that we've all made up. And we are now in times that being behind can be pushed to the back of our mind. I'm also going to encourage us to think through our language and our expectations. So I know a lot in the spring, I found myself using the language of homeschooling. And unless you are one of the parents who has really gone through your district or your state to be in the homeschooling practices, we are talking tonight about our role as parents, as facilitators of our children's virtual and hybrid learning. Another thing I wanted to dive into today is really thinking through, so where are we going to spend our time tonight? We're going to look through some of what we learned from the spring. The thing I really want to dig into tonight is looking beyond some of the obstacles and embracing some of the opportunities. I know during this challenging time, it's hard to see the silver lining, but there are silver linings and we have some data around that. So I'll present some of that. We'll talk a lot tonight about executive function and socio-emotional health and how these are very different times for supporting those in our children. And then of course, I'll give you some tools which I use in my own instruction, we're using in our home, and are just helping the day-to-day a little bit more. The first takeaway that I want to encourage us to think through is that what we are going through now, our present situation is very different than the spring. And believe me, I understand the spring was challenging for all of us. And it was challenging because it wasn't online education, it was crisis education. None of us were prepared. Teachers were not prepared, parents weren't prepared, students weren't prepared. And I say that as somebody who spent the last 15 years training masters and doctoral students in education. My job on a day-to-day basis is to train teachers. And never before in any of my coursework had I done any lectures, any conversations, any readings about what would you do if in a week the world shuttered and you had to teach your kids online. So we were very unprepared, and we're in a different situation now than we were several months ago. The data is really compelling when we talk about how the lack of preparation on behalf of students and teachers. And of course, the data is also there about how stressed parents are feeling today. An August survey revealed just really high thresholds of stress for parents, not only about decisions about school, but caretaking, financial implications. These are stressful times. But there is a silver lining. The bright side here is that our kids are actually doing okay with regard to stress. And some of that I think speaks to the resilience of kids. But let's look at this survey that came out from Psychology Today. It's a relatively small sample size, but it's one of the few surveys that I know. And the findings are pretty compelling. That when kids were surveyed, and these are tweens and our early teenagers, that when they were surveyed about their psychological feelings, their state of mind, that they actually reported that they've been calmer and that they have had more independence and more responsibility in these stressful times. And so when I think about those results, that data to me is pretty compelling in that we have an opportunity here to minimize our students' stress, our kids' stress, and maximize the opportunities that are inherent in the pandemic situation. So what are some of those opportunities, and how can we encourage our kids to embrace some of those opportunities? Well, it's the basics. It is more free time. I know on my street, I'm very fortunate to live in a neighborhood with a lot of families that send their kids out to play every day. Our street is full every day with parents biking with their kids and having family basketball games. And that's a positive that probably wouldn't have occurred without this situation. A lot of our kids are finding that as there are fewer after school activities, there's less of the chaos of being shuttled from one place to home to another. So there's more family time. There's more unstructured playtime. And we'll talk about how all of those positives lead to positive impacts on our students' socio-emotional health. So let's spend some time unpacking some of the sort of nitty-gritties. And when I think through how to support our kids at home, I think about 6 takeaways. They all start with S. And I'm going to unpack each of these. And I apologize for not saying this earlier, but if you go to my website, drmollyness.com, there is a place that you can give me your email address, and I will email some of these resources to you so that you don't have to feel like you are frantically scribbling some of these thoughts. So let's break down some of these takeaways. The first one being supplies and setups. So the most concrete thing we can do right away is to get our kids armed for success with child-friendly workspaces. And these workspaces can exist on any budget. I follow on social media, people are having a hard time finding desks. Well, you can take your dining room table and a trifold poster and make it into a child-friendly workspace. We actually did this in my house. We took a trifold poster that we had not quite gotten around to our spring science fair project. And this was one of the things we did this weekend. So my 5th grader, who is entirely virtual, took some inspirational stickers. She took some quotes that inspire her. She has a picture of her teacher glued on the inside flap. She has her personal schedule. She has a picture of our dog. And then binder clipped on the edge is the Google links or logins for all of her different specials. So this has become sort of one-stop shopping for her. She takes this, she moves it to wherever we are. It's particularly great for kids who have more than one family, more than one child. And what I like about this is you can fold it up at the end of the day and be done with it, and it is out of eyesight. But the idea here is that have kids have this conversation, make this something that they're excited about, make it personal to them, make it motivational for them. We want to make sure whatever format you're using, that our kids have all of their supplies and resources in one place. And there's so many different ways to do this. You can make yourself crazy on Pinterest by making your workspace look cute and clever. But the real takeaway here is that when we have all of these resources in one place, we minimize distractions. And the science here is pretty clear that every time we have a distraction arise, every time we yell down the hall, "Mom, I need Scotch tape," or "I can't find the scissors," that switching tasks leads to a decline of about 40% of our productivity. So for me, it's not just about the headaches of now I have to scramble through my junk drawer and find the scissors or find the Scotch tape, but more importantly, it is increasing my childhood's likely to be productive. In my house, what we do is at the end of the day, we also clean up those supplies. So I'll take my iPhone, she will choose her favorite song, and we will pack everything away and put it back into its space so that it's done. It is as much of sort of a representation of leaving school as we can have in these virtual times. And it also saves me the headache the next day of not being able to find the highlighter or Sharpie or what have you. So not only making sure it's all in one place, but then cleaning it up as a part of your sort of process of closing down shop for the day. On the far right-hand side, you'll see a personal word wall. So what we've done here is we just took a folder, and on sticky notes, we have words that are commonly misspelled for my kids so that she is not having to yell down the hall as I'm on a Zoom meeting of my own. How do you spell this word? And again, all of this is to minimize distractions, to increase the likelihood of kids being focused and productive. Another component of that is looking at seating and setup. So our schools in the last couple years made some really great advances in terms of flexible seating. Unfortunately, those flexible seating for most cases are being stored away because of the pandemic, but here's an opportunity that we can have some flexible seating in our homes. And I think it's worth having a conversation with our kids about when is it appropriate to be at a desk or to be at a table versus when is it appropriate to snuggle on a Yogi Bo or a beanbag or what have you. And so kids can start to have some accountability of what works for them, because certainly there are times when the teacher does a read aloud that it may be appropriate to be at some of that flexible seating. Another thing that I think is really worth having a conversation with the teacher about is the teacher's expectations of cameras being on and off. And there are lots of different camps around this. There are some people who insist on the camera being on because they see it as a way to increase accountability. How do I know that you're not, binge watching something in the background if the camera isn't on? And then this summer we started having conversations about, well, was having cameras on you raising issues of inequity? Was it adding more screen time and blue light, which impacts kids' sleep cycles and such? So if you're a parent of a child who the camera on is draining or is exhausting, and it's a very real thing. We've all read articles about Zoom fatigue. Our kids feel this too. So might you be able to have a conversation of when is 5 minutes that my child might have the camera off, still be attending, still be attentive, but we might be able to have some of that flexible option there and then. When we talk about the times that it's appropriate to sit at a formal desk, we want to make sure that we're replicating the 90-90-90 position, which is your ears over your shoulders over your hips, and then you see the 90-degree angles at the knees and the hips. And the reason for this is that we're going to save our kids back pain, neck pain, eye strain, all of those things by getting them into an ergonomically correct sitting position. Not every kid is ready to sit 90-90-90 all day, so we might have some more flexible seating options that are useful. In my house, we have a wobble stool. You can buy them at teacher supply stores, and you can also buy them at Amazon and such. In the wobble stool, what I like about it is it encourages active sitting, which is very different than a high schooler slumping down in their bed, being on a Zoom meeting, but they're sort of a passive sitter. An active sitter is somebody who has to make sort of these micro adjustments by engaging their core. And the wobble helps give the brain the rocking motion, which can often produce a sensation of calming. All of these things sort of facilitate concentration. So might you buy a footrest for your kid? Might you have a bouncy band or buy some of those exercise bands that you link in between the legs of a chair so that they have sort of a kick kind of thing? Other things I think are pretty self-evident and sort of the organizational things, a stopwatch, a timer. Some other things that we've used in my house is a wireless mouse, especially for the kids that are using Chromebooks. The quality of the Chromebook mouse isn't great, so let's splurge and get the $15 wireless mouse. I can't say enough about blue light blocking glasses. You can buy them on Amazon for $15. My daughter really says that she can feel the difference when she wears them. I like having a clipboard that is going to allow my child, when they're not sitting in their traditional seat, they're still able to have a hard surface to write on. And then what I like about that clipboard is I like having one that has storage underneath for scrap paper. I also, at the beginning of the week, print off a lot of schedules and store them in there. We'll look at that in a second. But it's another way to minimize every time I take the, oh, I have to go get a scrap piece of paper, or, oh, I have to get an extra copy of that. I'm adding to the distractions, and I'm sort of chipping away at my child's ability to focus. And then there's so many different seating or desk seats. You can buy them at the dollar store. You can buy ones that are adjustable. Just some nice things to have. Let's talk about the importance of schedules. And when we talk about schedules, I want to encourage the use of not only a weekly schedule that we review Sunday night prior to the start of the week, but also a daily schedule. And there's some pretty compelling research that shows how schedules help not only children, but adults as learners. I know that if I have a week off and I don't have a concept map to structure my time, I'm less productive. I don't initiate things as much. I'm not as likely to go to the gym. I don't plan and prioritize. And so we want to give our kids all of the ability to make the best use of their time, to figure out what they're going to initiate and what they're going to prioritize. So let's take a look at some of the realities and the dreams of the COVID schedule. So I remember back, you may remember seeing this came on social media, went around, lots of people printed it out. I went to the next level of type A. I laminated it and hung it on my kitchen counter. And I think this schedule maybe made it through about 3 days. Our academic time in the afternoon was going to consist of virtual tours to Machu Picchu, and we were going to go visit the Louvre online. And quickly it became the joke of our household. And if you're anything like me, your schedule morphed into something like this. The reality certainly did not match the dream. The problem was that first schedule was trying to take the structure of the school day and replicate it. And that just wasn't where we were in the spring. Fortunately, our scheduling now, I think, is a bit more cohesive. We've got it a little bit more ironed out in that we are on more of a regular schedule for the most part. But when you start to look at kids, these are those same 8 to 13-year-olds that were polled by Psychology Today. Most kids are still reporting that they're not really keeping a schedule with regularity. And so what can we do to help them with that schedule? The point of the schedule being to reduce wasted time, to improve productivity, to minimize stress. And there are so many different schedules that might work for you. You might take something like this if you have really young learners, where you have a morning, afternoon, and evening routine, and you map out your different subjects. If you have really young kids at home, you might use a picture schedule. So this was just a photo that I took of a schedule that I made when my daughter was in preschool. Obviously she wasn't reading yet, so we used clip art, and we would go through our schedule every day and change the clip art. I had Velcro on the back of each of these laminated cards, so we would swap them out, and we would review our daily schedule every day. A huge reason of scheduling is that it supports kids' executive function. And what do I mean by executive function? I mean our mental skills that help us focus, that help us prioritize, that help us attend to a task, that help us think flexibly, that help us manage work, and to manage life. When I think about executive function, I think of it as sort of like the flight control tower of our brain. If you think about the flight control tower at JFK or LaGuardia, they are doing 90 million things at once. They are making sure this plane is ready to taxi, and this one's landing safely, and radioing to this group. And that's what executive function does. It's managing all of these tasks so we can be successful. And our kids who have poor executive function struggle academically, they often struggle socially because they can't follow directions, they can't focus, they can't regulate their emotions. And our challenge now is that as we've transferred to virtual learning, the structure of school, having an adult always there in your presence, is more hand-holding and more scaffolded executive function than we're experiencing with hybrid and virtual learning. So what do we want our kids to be able to do with their executive functioning skills? We want them to be able to open up their Chromebook and know what needs to be done by visiting Google Classroom. Then we want them to know how to log into this place while making sure that they are addressing the big book report that's due on Friday. So they need to plan their time, they need to adjust, they need to regulate and say, I have more work that I need to do on this task, or this is going to take longer than I thought. And when I think about kids who struggle with executive function, I think about grown-ups who struggle with executive function. These are our grown-ups who took out the laundry and then they start a shopping list and then they go off on one task and they end up doing something that is not at all aligned with where the task that they initiated. And so they end up sort of having a whole lot of unfinished products, and those unfinished products can lead to frustration and sense of not being able to achieve anything. So what are we going to do to support kids with their executive function skills? Well, here are some of my favorite ones. The first one being the Pomodoro technique. And the origin of the Pomodoro technique, it came from an Italian student who was a university student. And because he lived in Italy, he took his little kitchen timer, which happened to be in the shape of a tomato, and he would set increments. And the Italian word for tomato is pomodoro. He would set increments of 25 minutes. I'm going to work on just one task for 25 minutes. And he would give himself that 25-minute, turn that timer on, the 25 minutes would ding, and then he would give himself a 5-minute reward of yoga or stretching or getting a glass of water or whatever it was. In other words, he was taking intervals and using those intervals as a measure of his productivity and only focusing on one particular task at hand. That is why many kitchen timers today are in the shape of tomatoes, because of this Pomodoro technique. And the research is really compelling. Actually, I had a doctoral student of mine at Fordham who researched the Pomodoro technique and found that just by taking a particular increment of time and focusing on one task for that time, our productivity increased. Now that interval may change based on the age and level of your kid. A kindergartner isn't going to be ready for 25 minutes of one focused task. So maybe they start with 5 minutes and they get a 3-minute stretch break or what have you. When we think about executive function, we think about the parent facilitating. So our conversations and our guidance to help our kids plan and prioritize. And that often begins with taking a look at what you had done previously so that you can build the framework to add on new knowledge. There are all sorts of great apps for executive function. My favorite source for some of those apps is commonsense.org. If you go to commonsense.org, many of you may know it because it's a great resource for parents who are looking for age-appropriate television and movies and such. They have a recommendation list of apps for executive function. And there are all sorts of different ways to limit our tech distractions, which as a kid gets on their iPad or their Chromebook, their executive function is being challenged so much because how do they resist opening up a different browser and watching that YouTube video? Or how do they resist the temptation to chat with a friend? You might look into some of these apps that take away your role as the parent in doing that and put it on the barrier itself. And then, of course, all sorts of physical activity breaks. One of the other things that we can do to support our kids' executive functions are simple daily check-ins, conversations that are informal, casual conversations as you're pouring the bowl of cereal for breakfast. What are you going to do today? What's your special? How is your time going to be spent? What do you need? And how can I help? And then having a conversation at the end of the day where we take the temperature and say, how did it go? How much progress did you make? What went well? What didn't go well? and what can we do tomorrow to make it better? And I like having conversations about what didn't go as well as planned, because that's the reality of this situation, that there are days that are going to be great and there are days that are not going to be not so great. In my house, we're using this particular remote learning plan, which I believe I just downloaded from Etsy. I'm happy to share it if it's something that is of interest to you. What I like about this is how student-centered it is. It has the child say, all right, here are the tasks that I need to accomplish. Here are 5 steps that I want to make sure that I've gotten to each day. Here are my different content area classes or subject matter. So I like that it's really putting a lot of shift on the student to promote their own responsibility. We have to be so mindful of our kids' socio-emotional health lately. And when I talk about socio-emotional health, I'm looking at a kid's ability to form relationships, to regulate their emotions, and to explore and to learn all of these skills and developments within the context of family and community. And for me, the biggest takeaway of the spring was a theory called Maslow before Bloom. And some of you out there, I believe, are my former students, so thanks for chiming in. You'll remember that I am not somebody who spends a lot of time talking about psychology and theory, only when it's really relevant. And so the Maslow before Bloom theory is incredibly important now. It is the belief that we as humans need our basic needs met before any learning can happen. And I know that sounds like a dull, very straightforward and obvious, but it hasn't always been so obvious in our planning and design of schools and curriculum. So Abraham Maslow was an American philosopher and psychologist who talked about the hierarchy of needs, that we have to feel physiologically safe and secure. We have to feel love and belonging. We have to feel esteem. We have to have the ability to meet our potential. And all of these things build upon each other. And until I meet these particular needs, I can't get to Benjamin Bloom's idea about all of the higher order thinking skills of going into learning. And so the way I think about this is there are days that my daughter has struggled with her socio-emotional health. She's stressed, she's tired, and I can spend as much time as I want trying to encourage her to remember the facts of her science packet or recall the main idea of her story. But if her socio-emotional health isn't met, that learning isn't going to happen. And so to me, this is permission to really place value on our kids' socio-emotional health and have that be the foundation for learning. And there are so many things we can do to support their socio-emotional health. We can teach them breathing exercises. We can give them language to label how they're feeling. We can give them distractions and time away from technology, which is playing or art or reading. And we also have to be ready to validate and listen to them and let them know it's okay to feel frustrated. You're spending a lot of time on the computer. This is hard stuff. It's hard not to be in school full time. It's hard to wear a mask. It's hard not to be able to hug your friends or your teacher. And here are some things that we can do. And so that listening and that validating is so important. The next takeaway I want to share is staying in touch. And there's a pretty big discrepancy when you start to look at teenagers and how much they are staying in touch with their teachers and their school leaders. What I want to encourage you here to do is to communicate with teachers. We are now 2 or 3 weeks in. Let teachers know what's working, what's not working, what's taking a long time, where are their struggles, where are their confusions. And as much as possible, we want our kids to be able to advocate for themselves. So might we as a parent help facilitate our child's check in with your teacher, hang out with them on Google and tell them what's working or what's not. So we are facilitating that, giving them the language to use while encouraging them to be their own advocates. And that's a life skill that's going to follow them in secondary school and college and life. Another big takeaway is to step away from screens. Sometimes I think we need to give our kids permissions to close up shop and say, we're done for the day. And in my house, this is what we've done to step away from screens. We went to the dollar store and we rummaged through our closets and found things that we hadn't gotten to play with for a while. And we put them in this activity box. And again, because I'm very type A, I made a list so that she knew exactly what the contents of that box were and what the contents were that she could do on her own and what the contents were that she could do with me. So that during those times where I had a faculty meeting and she had 15 minutes, I could avoid the "what should I do now" question, which I know every parent is getting really tired of hearing. Well, what you should do now, go take a look at the activity box. Find something that looks fun, that is stepping away from the screen. And a big way of stepping away from the screen is helping kids find a passion project. And this is something that I'm really passionate about myself. A passion project is what makes our children, what makes learning feel joyful and light for them. And it is a self-directed, self-created project. We as adults do passion projects all the time without knowing that they had a name for them. So if you learned to knit this spring when you are in quarantine, or if you planted a vegetable garden, or if you got certified to be a yoga teacher, or if you learned to bake bread, you engaged in a passion project. Well, what can we do as teachers and parents to help kids create that time and space for a passion project? Let me show you how it looked in my home. This was this summer. My daughter became very fascinated with Elon Musk and the space launch this summer. And so she created a passion project. She mapped out what she wanted to learn. She mapped out what she wanted to do. And then we got a huge cardboard box and made a rocket, which provided hours of entertainment. This was entirely on her own. And the learning opportunities were so rich here. We read books about rockets. We watched YouTube videos about them. We watched movies about them. So there was so much that we could do with this, but it was all on her own and it was really student driven. And so those passion projects can look like so many different things. To me, the best thing that we can do is step away from screens and read. And I'm a literacy teacher, I'm a literacy researcher, so I'm always pushing the role of independent reading. I have to make a plug for literacy and reading, but this really got me through the spring, that when teaching and parenting just felt like it was too much, the best thing that we could do is feed our kids socio-emotional health and read together. And I want to make sure that in all of the screen time, we are still carving time for independent reading. And I mean that as a whole family. I think a lot of us have gone to the place of fearing my kids will fall behind. So what app can I get? Or what workbook can I buy? Or what pod can I create to make sure they're still on track? And the research shows that the biggest predictor of academic achievement is reading. It's not flashcards, it's not workbooks, it's not computers, it is a parent creating a literacy-rich home environment. And your job as a parent is to be that role model for the importance of reading and the joy of reading and the love for reading. And what I want to really make sure when I talk about independent reading, I mean whatever that child has chosen. It could be the picture book that they're in 8th grade and they're reading a picture book and you're kind of thinking to yourself, aren't they a little old for that? Don't pass judgment, let it go. It can be graphic novels. It can be a book that they've read 8 times before. In my house right now, my daughter is reading Fart Powder, which is a series of 5 books. And of course, as the title implies, has every sort of joke about toilet humor and such. My instinct is saying, shouldn't you be reading Anne of Green Gables or Call of the Wild? But the best thing I can do is let her choose, because that is the independent reading that is nurturing her and giving her joy and making learning light. Also creating time and space in your home where literacy is a social act. By that, I mean, it is not send your kid to their room and have them read on their own. It is creating family book clubs. In the spring, my daughter and her cousins, who are close in age, at 5 o'clock every day, they did a Zoom book group where they literally read to each other the same book. We got them all copies of it. That is reading as a social act. In my house, we did a text set around Bruce Springsteen. Today is the boss's birthday, and here's what we did today. We celebrated by reading texts which are at adult level and kid level, and then came to talk about it. And this is a picture of my friend's child who took all of his stuffed polar bears, and he is reading to them a book about polar bears because he is seeing his parents model literacy as a social act. Other opportunities in showing kids that literacy is everywhere. When we go hiking, literacy is showing the map and reading the map. When we do pretend play, like creating ice cream shops at home, that's literacy. We can read to pets, and there's a lot of fun research around that, or we can read to our baby sister or brother at home. It's all important. And it can also be humorous. So in the middle, you see a slide when I went to visit my niece. She warned me that the toilet was going to flood. The highlighted list is Emily. Her goldfish died, and so she took out her pen and paper and wrote a guest list for the funeral. And then finally, when my sister wrote an email, a letter to her brother who was homesick, and the message says, I don't like you. I don't care if you feel better. I want you to stop hogging all of the attention. If you're really sick, then I won't go near you or give you anything. You get sick too much. This is fake and you will die young. And so there certainly is the humor in literacy. So finally, I wanted to show a couple of sanity savers that have helped me just get through the day when the parenting patience is wearing thin as it has been. The first thing that I think is really effective is coming together as a family and creating some norms that are constantly, that are up for the whole family to see. So maybe those norms are every day you're gonna get up and you're gonna get dressed, because maybe in the spring that didn't happen. Another sanity saver, I have avoided the what's for lunch and what can I have for a snack by every day, or I'm sorry, every week we create, this hangs on the fridge, and it is a menu. Maybe your kids can't read this, so maybe you have clip art that does the same thing, but it encourages that independence, takes some of our parenting workload off, and saves some of that time. So a couple of virtual tools that I wanted to share out. Rewordify. Rewordify, if you don't know it, I love it because you can take a text, a digital text, and you highlight it, and it spits out a more readable version of that text. So particularly those of you who have middle schoolers, as their assigned reading is getting more difficult, have them try out Rewordify. It takes the reading level down. Dragon Home, lots of our kids are using Google Scholar to do dictation. Dragon Home is another great one. And Wonderopolis, I am very interested in student curiosity and how we can use it as a learning tool. And Wonderopolis is a free service that you can subscribe to that every morning will shoot out a question, why are apples red, or why do volcanoes erupt? And they create these great conversations around inquiry. Finally, I think the biggest opportunity that we as parents have now is to model some life values that we are going to need as we continue to go through these challenging times. First of all, patience with ourselves, patience with our teachers, patience with our school systems, knowing that all of these decisions are often beyond their control, and that people really need some grace, some flexibility, and some kindness. And then another thing that has really gotten me through these challenging times is humor. So when my daughter takes her Google's classroom meeting with a pencil up her nose, it's funny. And when a third grader does a math problem saying there's 26 kids at the beach and 37 more come to the beach, how many kids are there? There are too many for COVID-19. Clearly this child is learning something about social distancing. Finally, as we wrap up, I want to make sure that we keep in mind that this is temporary. And I know it doesn't always feel that it's temporary. It's something I struggle with all the time. But our mindset and our approach as adults can really have a huge impact on our children's ability to manage stress, to let go of some of the emotional baggage that they may be carrying from the spring, to embrace some of the opportunities that are in this unusual situation, and to be surprised by what arises and what the results are. And finally, lest you think I've got this whole parenting pandemic thing figured out, my daughter wrote this love note to me. She apparently thinks I am not only lazy, but annoying. And so I am constantly reminded that this is hard work, and we all need grace, even if it doesn't come from our children. So finally, as we spend some time for questions, I want to just make sure you know how to get a hold of me. And then I just wanted to share this final resource, which it has not even come out yet. I believe it is being published this week. It's from Corwin, which is the publisher that published my last 2 books. And they have created a series of, for teachers out there, they have created the Distance Learning Playbook for Teachers. And there is a new one that is for parents. And interestingly enough, the Distance Learning Playbook for Teachers is on the New York Times bestseller list. It's pretty rare for an education book to be on the bestseller list. So please, if you've got additional questions, I'm happy to answer them online or on the phone. But let me open up the floor to some questions.
So we have a question. If your child has a very hard time regulating their emotions and bodies, how can we set them up for higher level learning, because it's hard for them to feel that their basic needs are met?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we can do most is give each child individual attention time, 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. That is you and mom or you and dad, and all you do is you do whatever the child is interested in. So maybe that's playing trucks, or maybe that's building blocks, or maybe that's going and walking the dog, or whatever it is, and giving that child 100% undivided attention. And I mean, put your phone away, so that your child is getting all of that socio-emotional stuff built up and getting their bucket filled, so that they're then ready to move on to some more of the academic tasks.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. There's another question. How do you propose you set up a good work environment when you have multiple kids of different ages?
Yeah. So I think first of all, I would do a family conversation. I might get a huge piece of sticky note or a piece of butcher paper or a piece of poster board and have everybody brainstorm what their space looks like. Maybe they draw it. So maybe you've got a 10th grader, a 7th grader, and a 3rd grader. And maybe you give everybody 5 minutes and say, draw a space in your mind that is ideal for you. And then you come together and you say, well, what do these spaces have in common? And maybe we can add some of those commonalities to our family contract. And then what do these spaces have that are different? Because absolutely, the needs of a 10th grader are going to be different than the needs of a 3rd grader. And so I think we also need to allow our kids some independence and some choice in choosing what their work environment looks like. Right now, kids are feeling like a lot of their choices have been taken from them. And so if the choice is, today I'm going to work outside on the picnic table because it's a gorgeous day, I'm okay with that choice. And that choice can change throughout the day. That's one of the reasons I love those trifold posters so much, because if your only space is a dining room table, I can still create 3 separate workspaces where my kids are out of each other's vision. And those also can move. So as you know, the 10th grader is annoying the 3rd grader, the 3rd grader can pick up their workspace because it's as light as a piece of poster board and take it to another space. And that space could be the carpet, it could be the picnic table outside, what have you. So I think getting kids buy-in and feedback and saying what's going to work for you and how is that different than what's going to work for your brother is going to be a lot of the motivation and buy-in that they need, and that they're having taken away from them because they're losing so many experiences that are normal and typical in their childhoods.
Yeah, I guess it also gives everyone a sense of ownership for
Absolutely.
their own space and agency over what's going on for them during the day.
Which right now kids don't really have very much ownership. And so if that ownership is you get 20 minutes on the yoga ball chair and then it's your brother's turn, those are little things that we can do at home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have another question. What do you suggest to do with children who have attention issues and have too much time in their hands on the days that they're doing the synchronous or asynchronous learning?
So those are the kids that I would do passion projects with. I I would have them.
Just on the heels of that, someone else asked, what's the ideal age for a passion project?
What I love about passion projects is there isn't an age. You can have a passion project when you're 93 and you can have a passion project when you're 3. And what I want to be clear about with a passion project is it's the process that matters, not the product. So my fourth grader's product was this box spaceship. That was what she chose. A 10th grader might want to do a YouTube video. That's their product. I don't care what the product is. This isn't learning to create something. This is learning for the joy of it. So my 3-year-old, their passion project might be about trucks. And we take them to a construction site and watch about trucks. And then we got library books about trucks. So they're just passion projects. I think one of the things I love about them is they're so student-centered. We can say to the kid, what are some of the things that really you think are cool or you want to know more about? So it's entirely from the student, and then you get them involved in, well, what could we do with that? Could we make a video? Could we make a poster? Could we draw a book that has, you know, an ABC book about trucks or what have you? So there's so many different ways to differentiate it according to the age of kids.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I guess it's sort of an ageless project because
Yep.
you can meet the child wherever they are in whatever age or stage.
Yeah, and the reason my passion project with my daughter came is because at the beginning of the summer, trips were canceled, day camp was canceled, overnight camp was canceled, and I'm thinking, I'm really, really tired, and I've got this really long time ahead of me in the summer. What are we gonna do that isn't more screen time? And so a passion project, you can still involve screen time of, all right, you get 10 minutes to go watch a YouTube video about whatever the topic is, and then we're going to pull in some of these other things. So there's ways that you can still get some of the tech stuff if that's your kid. And you can even appeal to kids who are real tech kids. So if you've got a kid who's a gamer, have their passion project be about gaming. And why? Prove to me, your passion project is, I want you to explain to me the learning benefits of Minecraft. And that's your passion project. So there's so many different ways to engage kids of all different levels and interests.
This is a good question. For children who tend to bottle up emotions and say everything is fine, how can you get visibility into their true mental state?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So
let me just remind people, people are typing questions into the chat. If you could type them into the Q&A, it will be much more upfront and center. So the Q&A is at the bottom of the screen to the right before the leave button. So if you guys could, focus there, that's where we're going from. So I'll just answer.
Thank you for that reminder, because it gave me a couple seconds to think. So I am answering this as a parent and as a literacy professor, not as somebody who has a formal training in children's developmental health. So I would, of course, if there are any issues or you want more expertise about that, Herd and Rye has so many great resources there. But I think what I would do is rethink how I, as the adult, was asking the questions, because it's like, we always say, how's your day at school? Great. And then we're frustrated because the kid didn't say anything. It's a very different conversation of, tell me the best thing that happened at school today. Tell me the funniest thing that happened at school today. So I think it's changing your questions that are open-ended, that leave room for debate. And I think it's also giving kids a heads up of, tonight at dinner, or when we have ice cream tonight, I want you to be ready to share the one thing that you did this week that was super cool in learning. Because a lot of kids feel put on the spot. So if you give them a heads up of, at dinner tonight, be ready to share out.
I would also just add that, you know your child. So if your child says fine, and they're not, I would definitely look at their body language and identify, no, I noticed that you're kind of slumping over, that your head's kind of low, that, you kind of have this look on your face like things aren't fine. Do you want to, why don't you tell me about that?
Yep. And what you're doing there is that validation language of, it's
Absolutely.
okay for it not to feel fine, because this
Totally.
is hard stuff. And another thing I think we need to do is model it as ourselves as parents. And there were a lot of days this spring that my daughter would struggle. And I struggle too. And rather than forcing them through, just being honest and saying, you're right, this is pretty lousy, let's go for a walk, is a life skill that I care more about than her ability to finish the vocabulary packet. So that's what when I talk about flexibility and grace and socio-emotional health, it's some of that modeling too.
Right. So what are the best writing tools you've seen online? Zoom has a great whiteboard, but I want more functional options.
So, frankly, most of the students that I have worked with who are struggling writers, I want them to be able to write by speaking. So I will often just take out my phone and say, talk to me. I'm going to video you, talk as you talk through what you want to write. And then I act as their scribe and I just type it out for them, because what I'm doing there is, when you think about the writing process, there's two things that are complicated. There is idea generation, and then there's the mechanics. And if I can take away the struggle of the mechanics and have them focus on the idea generation, then that's what digital tools will help me do. So maybe it is, a lot of times when I work with kids, a lot of it is just getting out of the writing has to be on a formal piece of paper. Maybe you get, big, huge sticky notes that hang on the wall, and you get kids markers and they write that way, or you get them on the floor and they write that way. Because I think some of it is also just this kind of mental block of how they are used to writing in school. Mm-hmm. But when I say facilitate as a parent, I can't wait. You're right now, you're working on a small moment story. I'm going to take out my video and you're going to talk through it, and then we will work on writing it together, is a great way to just get that process started. And that's essentially what some of the Google dictation stuff does. And I'm okay with that. I think it's worth asking your teacher, when is it okay for my kid to be using a dictation service, and when should they be writing?
So I have a question also about that specifically relates to that, and that's, do the dictation apps work for the chat box in Google Live Classroom chats? My second grader doesn't know how to type, yet the expectation from the teacher seems to be that he does, and it's frustrating for him.
Sure. So first of all, I think that's one of the takeaways was stay in touch. So I think that's a really great point to reach out to the teacher of. We're able to do the assignment, but we're blocked by just the typing. What could I do to support him? I think is really useful. And all of the different, there's so many platforms. I can't necessarily speak to Zoom or Google, because there's just, everybody's using something different. I think it is worth having a conversation though with your teacher of, when is it okay and when is it acceptable to be using a dictation thing versus when should they be actually writing? Because I was watching my daughter do this the other day, and when you use dictation or when you use Google Scholar or any of that stuff, it will auto-correct mechanics. And so it's sort of like taking a little bit of the learning out. And, at some point, something's got to give. We can't necessarily replicate all of what happens in a classroom with these digital things. So I have to focus on, do I want her to learn the difference between there, and there, or do I want her to finish this writing assignment? And what is the crutch that's going to help this process?
We have time for one more question.
Sure.
My daughter hates reading. She is 11 and moans and groans about it. I model reading for pleasure, but it hasn't really had any effect on her. She is in 7th grade. She skims her school reading and doesn't fully understand the content. What suggestions do you have at this point, or is it too late? It's not too late. It's never too late.
So,
I can tell you that.
So reading motivation is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about. And I do whole day seminars on this. So in a nutshell, what we know about motivating kids to read is an acronym, ARC, A-R-C, access. So access to lots and lots of books that are of all kinds. And by that, I mean graphic novels and picture books and magazines and whatever. We have to get over it is only acceptable for them to be reading from the canon or a separate piece or what have you. R is relevance. So the kids need to be reading something that's relevant to them. And that's where some of our parenting judgment has to shut up And I say this as something that I struggle with. When my daughter was in 3rd grade and only wanted to read the Minecraft books, which are hardly anything of literary value, they were relevant to her. And I had to put my judgment away and let her read that because that was relevant to her. And then the biggest thing is choice. And it's all about letting them choose what they want to read, getting away from that's too easy or that sort of thing. And I will say that we also have to start thinking of audiobooks as reading. And so in my house, we read more than ever now because we're home and we have a book going all the time. So my daughter takes my little speaker. We have Audible. She takes a little speaker into the bathroom while she's showering. She's listening, she's reading. So maybe it is getting podcasts or books that way. And your daughter may be interested in that sort of reading. The second part of the question was more about comprehension. And I don't think time allows us, but I'm happy to have follow-up conversations about that because there are really great ways to support kids' comprehension. And I will say that comprehension goes hand in hand with executive function. And so kids that sometimes struggle with some of that executive function stuff may have comprehension struggles.
I just have one more because I think it's a good one because I think that there is a big struggle with parents having to be involved with wanting to foster independence. And the question is, how do you balance fostering an independence, but also feeling responsible for explaining the material to your child in the absence of the, interaction with the teacher? Technically, classwork shouldn't be done with a parent by your side, but the younger kids can't manage without guidance.
So I would communicate with the child and with the teacher of what are the priorities of all of these tasks. What is the most important for us to focus on this week? What are the things you really want us to take away? And then have a particular time frame that knowing that, all right, we really want you to understand the causes of the American Revolution. And then sitting with your child for that task, and then maybe letting go some of the other work and having them do it independently so that we're helping them prioritize. Again, that's an executive function skill. And also checking with the teacher about, we can't get to it all. What's really the priority? What's really relevant?
Right, so that you can stand back and let them do what they can do. Yep. If the teacher is okay with that.
Yep. And again, it's that thinking of yourself as a facilitator. And a lot of that, again, goes back to that communication with teachers. Your teacher who is assigning a 2nd grader to type just may not know that. It may not even have crossed their mind, like, oh my gosh, of course they can't write it, or they don't know typing yet. And just that simple little tidbit, that one little thing may really open the door to more possibilities of what is a better use of time, or what's more effective, or what's more supportive.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Molly. I mean, for those of you who don't know, normally Heard and Rye is an in-person event at our local venues, but this has sort of allowed us to expand. We've had people from Texas and Oklahoma and Hartford and, all over, coming to join us, which has been so great. We do hope to return in person at some point whenever this permits. But in the meantime, please join us next month where Jonathan Mooney on October 26th will talk about the end of school and the future of learning. It's a great talk. He's a dynamic speaker, much like Molly has been. Thank you so much. You were very terrific. And, thank you for joining us and being our first speaker of the year. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you next month.
Thank you. And I should also say, please feel free to contact me. And this is recorded. So if people want to share with people who were not able to make it.
Right. This will be on our website at heardandrye.org. And you have Molly's contact information. It's also in the chat screen. And like I said, we'll have this posted on our website if you'd like to watch at any point. So thank you very much. We'll see you next month.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.